Welcome to EV100 at Climate Week New York City with the Climate Group. This is an adaptation of the event we normally do in New York City, but since we're all transitioning to an online event that enables more people to join us around the world. So thank you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Chelsea Sexton. I'm particularly excited to be joining this year because I have been working on vehicle electrification for about 25 years. So the momentum of these days is really inspiring. And yet, sitting here in Southern California, where the effects of climate change are acute and in front of us every single day, I know there's so much more work to be done. Much of that work has always been led by organizations like the Climate Group and happy warriors scattered throughout companies and organizations around the world. It's always been this community of pioneers and leaders that has moved this movement forward, sometimes more than the industry itself. It feels like we're pulling a little bit more than they're pushing, but we meet in the middle and have made a ton of progress over the years. EV100 started in 2017 and nearly 90 companies have joined since. We've brought a bunch of them together today to tell their stories, inspire you with their lessons learned and their leadership. We've developed a little bit of a video so you can take a look here at a bit more of their work.
The transport sector is the fastest growing contributor to climate change, accounting for around a quarter of energy-related emissions. Electric transport offers a major solution, and given the large number of new vehicles registered to companies each year, business has an opportunity to lead. That's where the Climate Group's EV100 initiative comes in. By committing to switch their fleets to electric by 2030 and influencing employees and customers to do the same, EV100 members are sending a bold demand signal to the market. In just 3 years, nearly 90 global companies have signed up, showing that EVs are great for business as well as great for the climate.
A big contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions is our fleet, the ways in which our employees are driving and commuting. And so we have signed up for EV100 because we know that when we fundamentally change how we work, in this case drive the vehicles, we're going to dramatically impact that portion of our operational footprint. And so that's why we're excited about taking 16,500 vehicles and as quickly as we can converting them. But there are obstacles we face, such as infrastructure, such as access to the electric vehicles we're wanting to bring into our fleet. So we're putting out there the demand and the need for infrastructure so that all of us, government, other sectors, can help solve this problem together.
So I really think lessons learned and shared experiences are going to be really powerful in helping accelerate the transition to electric vehicles.
The market availability of a more diverse range of models is really important. What's been really helpful is in putting ourselves out there and being first movers in this space. The amplification of our efforts through EV100 has also been really meaningful in getting leadership support and really getting public attention on an area that would otherwise be overlooked.
With countries pledging to end the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles and cities bringing in zero-emission zones, companies are getting ahead now by switching to electric vehicles. And the automakers are starting to notice. But this is the climate decade, And to halve emissions by 2030, we need to pick up the pace. We look forward to working with our members to share their experiences and celebrate their progress, to persuade many more companies to follow. Together, we are driving a faster rollout of electric vehicles that will make them more accessible and more affordable for everyone.
That was so cool. One of the most impressive things is just the breadth of organizations that are involved. And I am incredibly excited about our next speaker. I am known to like torque and horsepower more than most people rightfully should, and Formula E is one of the most galvanizing representations of electric performance. Please welcome Hannah Brown, Chief Strategy Officer of Formula E.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Chelsea. It is truly an honour to be invited here today to make the opening remarks for what is the 11th running of Climate Week, New York City. I'd like to welcome everyone joining from around the world, watching on screens, listening and interacting virtually during these difficult and unprecedented times. I'm sorry that we cannot all see each other in person, but I am sure that we will do so soon, and hopefully some of you will be able to join us at our races next season, including our plan to be back racing in New York City on July the 10th, 2021. It is amazing to think that it has already been 3 years since the launch of the EV100 programme, and we at Formula E are incredibly proud to be an ambassador as one of the founding members since its inception in 2017. What makes this event so special is it brings together like-minded companies, organisations and decision makers with a shared vision of a more sustainable future. It is fantastic to see how the EV100 programme and campaign to transition to clean mobility has grown. Since its launch in 2017, there are now over 85 leading companies committed to move to fully electric fleets by 2030. This is extremely positive and shows that if everybody pulls together, we can all make real and tangible change to counteract the effects of climate change. At Formula E, our mission includes the same commitment as the title of this very session, to accelerate electric vehicle adoption. That was a founding principle of our sport, and just like the ambitions of the climate group, we want to accelerate climate action fast. The goal of the climate group is to achieve global net zero carbon emissions by 2050, with greater prosperity for all. This will only be made possible by building large and influential networks and holding organisations to account, turning their commitment into action. This week, we announced that Formula E has become the first sport to be certified as a net zero carbon footprint since its inception. By investing in the highest standard of projects internationally, we have been able to offset emissions from the past 6 seasons of racing, bringing environmental and social benefits to each of our race markets. We did this by following the UN recommended approach to firstly, effectively measure and monitor our emissions, prioritise reducing our footprint, and then compensating unavoidable emissions with offsetting. Alongside our founding purpose to speed up the global uptake of electric vehicles, we also have a responsibility to minimise the environmental impact of our own operations. As a founding member of the EV100 programme, we not only remain committed to growing sustainable practices in line with our existing ISO 2012-1 certification, but we also hope to inspire others to join us on our journey. COVID-19 has brought sustainability issues to the forefront more than ever before and has given tangible evidence that there is a direct correlation between a decrease in transport and human activity with lower carbon emissions and cleaner air. During strict lockdown measures, cities around the world posted their lowest figures for toxic particles for over 30 years, and people in Delhi could see the Himalayas for the first time in 3 decades. This goes to show what the future could look like if we change our habits and actively embrace clean energy solutions, such as driving electric vehicles. When Formula E was launched in 2014, there were less than 500,000 electric cars on the road. As of last year, before the COVID crisis, the global sales of electric vehicles reached over 7.2 million in 2019 alone. Not only has the volume of electric vehicle sales risen, the number of different models available is also on the rise. Using the European market as an example, in 2020, the number of electric vehicle models available to buyers is expected to jump from under 100 in January to 175 by the end of the year. By 2025, there are projected to be more than 300 models available to consumers. Along with this wider array of electric cars to choose from, heavy-duty electric vehicles for businesses, construction, and other industries are also in development. However, we must do more. This is one race with no finish line, and we collectively need to stand together in solidarity to protect both people now and the planet for future generations. We must move faster to put the brakes on the devastating effects of climate change. Science says that we must limit the rise of global temperatures by 1.5 degrees centigrade to avoid lasting and irreparable damage. To be in with a fighting chance of doing this, we must halve global emissions in the next 10 years. So it's up to all of us to make a difference, including corporate leaders and policymakers who are listening today, making the 2020s a decade for climate action. Campaigns like the EV100 programme have been leading the way in pushing for positive change, and we hope more organisations can commit to these ambitious yet vitally important targets. I really hope you do enjoy the event and the panels lined up across the day. I'm sure it's going to be thought-provoking, challenging, and will help inform us all as we seek to make the best decisions we can to make our commitments a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for those inspiring words, and I still look forward one day to talking myself into driving one of your cars. Next up, we have a very cool panel about corporate EV leadership around the world. Lots of people and companies have been working as happy warriors on the inside of companies for years in different ways, and very few of the rest of us know enough about it. So we're going to dig into those efforts, tackle successes, challenges, and opportunities for further collaboration. I'll let each of them introduce their work, and then we'll get into collaborative discussion from there. First up, I'd like to introduce Pia Heidenmark Cook from Ingka Group, best known to us Americans as IKEA.
Hey everyone, really happy to be on this panel. At IKEA, we joined EV100 when it was founded a few years ago, and we set out that we would work with the whole spectra on EVs, but also to secure that our home deliveries are zero emissions by 2025, but also securing that we would have EV charging stations in our stores across the world. And since then, and to be very transparent, when we set it out, we were almost at zero emission vehicles, and this is a few years ago. And since then, we have doubled the number of electric trucks and vans that we have, not in our own fleet because we work with service providers, but together with our service providers, we are progressing. Also at the time when e-commerce is exploding and increasing a lot. So despite the increase we've seen in e-commerce, we are still managing to double, and we are learning a lot. We are today deploying electric vehicles and vans in 2/3 of our markets, so that's around 20 of our 30 markets. And we see that it is possible, but it's also a lot of work, and it really depends on the regions, where in some countries it's been quite fast and well, I wouldn't say easy, but quite fast, and in others it really requires a stakeholder approach where we need to work together with the manufacturers to develop vehicles that works for us, but we need to also work with the service providers, and we see that some of them work with asset-light business models, and also there are many of them. So really building the business case and getting them on board on the journey. We also see the fact that in some cities where we're moving forward, the warehouses are really far from the customer. So also with the traditional trucks like diesel and gas, it is not that easy. So to find the infrastructure. So it's a lot of stakeholders that need to be involved, and we have some really good learnings that I'm happy to share later, but it really requires working together, but it's absolutely possible, and I'm happy to share more later.
Fantastic, thank you. Next up, we have Amitash Shah from Flipkart.
Thanks, Chelsea. Hi, everyone. So let me first introduce Flipkart as well. Flipkart is the leading e-commerce company in India. It started around 13 years back, so we are fairly new from a company perspective. On the EV stuff, we essentially started in actually 2018. That was necessitated because of our need for I don't know if you guys will actually believe it, but it was for cost. And one of the reasons why we essentially saw that was the overall operations associated with it was actually came to be extremely low. But when we actually started off the pilot at that particular time in India, one of the biggest problems that we were facing as a country was the air pollution that you see in some of the big cities in India, like Mumbai, like Delhi, and obviously some of them have essentially made headlines as well. And when we looked at the kind of the trucks that we operate, so the supply chain of Flipkart actually goes all the way to the last mile, to the home of the end consumer as well. So which means that our extensive footage on the e-commerce actually goes to inside the cities, inside homes of people as well. So it actually felt to us that it is very important that we take an action on it and we be the leader of that project. The other area that becomes very important for us is that India is a country that is broken up into very small towns and urban areas. And the problem associated with that is that it allows you to many diseconomies of scale that you won't generally see in a lot of other areas. But it is also important that if you don't allow the menace of air pollution, or if you don't want to allow the menace of air pollution to go there, it becomes extremely important that we address that particular pit in all the cities and not only the central urban big mega cities that we have. So one of the big challenges that we took is that if we are going to fix things, we are going to fix it in all the places. We are going to be the leader there. We are going to make sure that all the partners in the ecosystem, be it the manufacturer, be it the service providers, all of them contribute to it. And we don't wait for things to happen in this space, but we make all these things happen for us as well. An example that we took at least was in our early days when we looked at actually reducing the plastics in our shipments. And what we learned from that until the leaders take the first step, it's not going to happen. So the same concept now we are actually using in EV. We are right now working with a lot of other agencies as well as the big manufacturers in India to ensure that we have vehicles which are compliant to our need and are also something that can serve the entire businesses and not only e-commerce. So we are actually taking the baby steps. Hopefully the whole country will also follow this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I love that boldness. Next up, we have Lani Mahanta from Lyft, and welcome to a fellow Californian.
Thanks for having me. At Lyft, I lead our policy development and research team, where we focus on policy creation and problem solving in the areas of sustainability, worker classification, privacy, safety, policy research, and analytics. But today I'm really excited to be speaking with all of you guys about sustainability. So at Lyft, we're really focused on addressing climate crisis by directly reducing emissions through electrification. We all know that climate change is not waiting. I'm in the Bay Area, and we are currently being ravaged by wildfires, unlike anything we've seen before in our. It's imperative, as I think we all know. Right now, transportation produces more emissions than any other sector in the US, and it's a major contributor to emissions across North America. So if we're serious about addressing climate change, at least from where Lyft sits, we have to decarbonize transportation, and we have to start now. So we've recently made a commitment to reach 100% EVs on the Lyft platform by 2030. We want to be part of the catalyst for change and creating a path for others to join as well. So by transitioning to electric vehicles, we have the potential to avoid tens of millions of metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions and to reduce gasoline consumption by more than 1 billion gallons over the next decade. We see a huge number of advantages to EVs, and it's not just good for the planet. Drivers are going to benefit from lower cost operation as EVs become increasingly cost effective. Communities, of course, will benefit from cleaner, healthier air. And riders are gonna who increasingly care about where they're spending their dollars, want to know that they're putting their money towards a company that is thinking about their responsibility to the planet. As others have mentioned, this is not something that we can do alone. We have to work with multiple partners. We're going to, working with our environmental NGOs, with federal, state, and local policymakers, with manufacturers to bring down the cost of EVs, working with charging partners and electric utilities to ensure that the charging infrastructure is affordable and available, and working with other advocacy partners as well. And we can get into some of how we're working with all these different groups later on. None of this is going to be easy. It's going to take all of us working together, public, private, nonprofit, to overcome the challenges and the barriers are ahead of us. But we're confident that we're at least taking the first steps that we need to get to where we need to be.
Fantastic. And finally, we have Ezgi Barcenas from InBev, which again, I shall translate for the Americans to Anheuser-Busch. And I suspect that many of our delegates may be enjoying some of your products as they're watching, or certainly afterwards in the virtual happy hours. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. So at InBev, as the world's leading brewer, we rely on healthy environments and thriving communities. And with operations across 50 markets, that's a huge undertaking. And we're committed to transitioning to a lower carbon economy. And one of our 2025 sustainability goals is a science-based target to reduce our carbon emissions by 25% across our value chain. And that puts us in line with the 1.5 degree pathway. And logistics represents almost 10% of those emissions. So we have a lot of work to do. And the way we go about it at InBev is, working to test, validate, and enable that transition, that electrification of our fleets across so many markets. And we're doing that by piloting right now. And we're excited to see some of the results. And, we currently have EV pilots in each one of our 6 operating zones. So that includes markets like the US, China, Belgium, Netherlands, South Africa, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. We're excited to join the discussion today and hear from our fellow panelists as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining. And as we dig in, you each represent very different points of view. There's a little bit of overlap, but there's lots of unique aspects. And so I'd like to ask, what unexpected things have you encountered or that you think are unique to what you've tackled and that others may learn from? So we'll kind of go in order just to keep it a little bit organized. Pia?
Well, I think starting out and setting the goal like we did, it was not something we knew. So I think for everyone, the learning is mainly get going, because if we're all going to wait for everyone else to solve it and then jump on it, then it's going to take us too long, because we need to deal with this now. So I think, yes, there are learnings, but my biggest learning is daring to take the step and go. And then I'm not sure if there's so many unexpected learnings, but once you start digging and you learn how the system is set up. One was, we are home furnishing for a retailer with flat packs, and what we saw that for quite a lot of the vans and lorries that we use, the flat pack didn't fit once it was turned into when it was an electric. So we are working together with some of the manufacturers to really adjust them so that it will be, we will have as high filling rate as we have for others, because throughout history, our 75 years history, filling rate to not drive out with half empty vans and lorries have always been very important, and that was a struggle. So I don't know if it was unexpected, but it was really something we saw that this we need to do, and we can't come up with it by ourselves. Another one, which maybe we didn't reflect on that much before, was the asset-light model and the network of service providers, where it's often the drivers that own their own vans and trucks. And it is a big capital investment from the beginning. And then, of course, it's much more cost effective to drive it and use it, but as an initial investment. And if you are one small driver, then the partnership or the agreement is actually not between Ingka Group and the individual driver, it's between the service provider and us. So that also, how can we look at then incentivizing? Should we find platforms for renting these to the service providers or the individual drivers? So it's all these kind of, you end up in business modeling quite quickly to solve it. So I think you need to have the right people at the table, the fulfillment team and the business model team, and then of course the sustainability team. But it moves from being a sustainability topic quite quickly, and it really needs to be owned and driven by the business to solve it.
Yeah, sure. Well, and it strikes me as I consider each of your perspectives that most of you have had to get involved over the years and are involved now in having to help design the vehicles that you need, because it strikes me that the sort of medium and heavy duty space, as we call it, commercial vehicles, has been one of the later ones to come along. So is that a fair statement, like show of hands? Who's had to get involved in helping to design and order the vehicles they want? Yeah, I sort of figured. And as far as the asset light model, that's similar, I think, for all of you. So are there the partnerships in place that we need? We often sort of point at the automakers of all forms and say, you need to build us more cars. But is it really the fleet managers of the world, whether, you know, Penske or another one that were a familiar name, are they the ones that need to get more involved?
We are operating in 30 countries, and within each country, you have very different situations from city to city. So, you know, the partnerships and the networks needs to be quite local. So you need to tackle one city at a time or one community at a time. So I think that's another learning that, you know, for example, we have already 6 cities in China running 100% on zero emission vehicles. And then when we announced that we would get it in 5 cities by 2020 already, back when we announced our partnership with EV100, we probably did not think that all of them would be as difficult as some of them have been. So New York is on track, Paris is on track, Amsterdam is on track, Shanghai was already a year ago, and LA actually is proving quite difficult. So it is really, you need to work with the manufacturers and the partners that are in that location. So I think that's another learning. To have big global partnerships is probably good to advance the cause and raise awareness, but then you need to dig in locally to solve it on the ground.
Sure. Similarly, Amitesh, you have sort of expanded into a space, grabbed your own space that hasn't had nearly as much support, isn't as known for electric vehicles as Europe and the US and China. What have you found that is sort of brand new that everybody else isn't realizing you're having to deal with? And to what extent are you able to learn from the other areas, or is this really blue sky territory?
Yeah, so first of all, I think, Pia, whatever you mentioned is actually applicable to us as well in obviously a very completely different context. But the fundamentals of the thing still actually remain the same. Essentially designing. So we have those 3-wheelers. I don't know if you have come to I don't know if you've been to Thailand or somewhere, you'll see those small, so a lot of goods carrier also happens to that. Okay, and one of the biggest challenges that we had to work on, and I have absolutely zero clue, I had zero clue of EV when we essentially started it. One of the biggest things that we had to address is that because of the center of gravity changes of that particular vehicle, it was prone to toppling. Okay, and that is obviously a big health hazard. So a lot of these things are very, very peculiar because the way ecosystems have been, essentially developed in India are in for that particular requirement. The kind of solutions that we have is very specific to that need. So trying to reformat that to EV is not always easy, and I think you will need a lot of design context to understand how it can be done. Maybe do some investments earlier on. The second part about the one thing that I mentioned, which was that India, unfortunately, or fortunately, you want to call it the way, but it is spread out. The population is really, really spread out. We hear about mega cities, but there is a lot of population that actually sits in small town cities. The problem here is that the service networks are very, very abysmal. In a way, the requirements are also extremely low. So when you are actually working with partners, you have to solve it with them end to end. You can't just go and say that, this is what you are required, this is what you have to do. They will come back with the same problems that I'm sure all of you guys face at a certain point of time. So in a way, at a very abstract level, I think all of us are actually solving the same problem. The context changes, and it ought to change as well. considering the kind of specific areas that we are looking for. But ultimately, it has to be solved in the same way. Work with partners, work with government, work with the ecosystem, invest. It requires investment as well to make sure that the overall system is ready for the next step when the whole ecosystem will actually grow up. So yes, a lot of these things are different, but I think the important point that I want to call out at an abstract level, a lot of these things are very, very similar. So we have to answer the same questions. It's just that the path that we will take will be slightly different.
Yeah, sure. And Lonnie, I mean, similarly, I'm sure, it's the same sort of thing of partners and whatnot, but you have a very different paradigm than sort of the more goods movement oriented folks, in that you have a vast network of more retail drivers in the automotive vernacular, more individual drivers that you have to sort of recruit into your big tent and then encourage along this path. What is unique about that people wouldn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges that we face are similar in kind, but a different flavor of it, right? We can't mandate what vehicles people have. We have nearly 1 million people that drove on the Lyft platform last year, and the vast majority of people are in personal vehicles. So we're going to have to be working with partners to help incentivize and encourage adoption and use of EVs. At the same time, we do have areas that we can focus on fleet management through our Express Drive program, where individuals can rent vehicles on a short-term basis. And that's where we've started a lot of our initial effort. So I think some of the things that we've done there are a really great highlight, an intersection of sort of working with policymakers and where we can do some of our first steps to helping drive large-scale EV adoption. In Colorado last year, we worked with policymakers to allow rideshare rental fleets to access the state EV tax incentive. That's a great place for policymakers to use tax incentives to help drive further adoption of electric vehicles. And so because of that allowed one of our partners to bring 200 electric vehicles to market in Colorado, which was the largest deployment of electric vehicles in that setting to date. So it's there's a lot of things that we're going to need to do for us to even reach our commitment of 100% EV in the next 10 years. But these sort of public-private partnerships, working with policymakers, is going to be a really important part of that conversation as we try to drive things forward.
It seems like a key role, given your sort of the ways in which you're bound by regulation, that you're not allowed to dictate, what people drive and where they charge and some of those things, is that your role becomes more of informational ambassador, of highlighting what is available from other folks, utilities or other stakeholders in this attempt to make EVs successful, so that your drivers can be aware of it even in ways you're not allowed to directly provide it. How much of that is the case, and how can we move that forward? What else needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So much of what we're going to be doing is it's going to be driving awareness, letting people know about incentives, letting people know about what is out there, what exists. We're also a place where there can be a rapid adoption of electric vehicles. So like a lot of things can be moving together at the same time. As costs for EVs start to come down, it's going to be in drivers' own financial benefit to be driving electric vehicles, right? Like as we see the cost of batteries continue to come down, the fuel savings that drivers are going to be realizing themselves is only going to be increasing over time. So there's going to be a bunch of work that we can do where we help people understand what exists, what's out there, what's in individuals' own financial interests, and then helping policymakers realize that like with good public policy, you can further incentivize the behavior that we want. There's a lot of sort of opportunity for win-win.
Mm-hmm. Ezgi, your company has made a bunch of announcements around certain startups, primarily, especially in the larger trucking space. To what degree is that key to making all of this work? There's often this tug of war between kind of the startups of Tesla or Nikola versus the incumbents like Daimler and Freightliner and who actually is needed to make this happen. What are you finding in terms of helping to move all of this forward? Who are the good partners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think maybe if I can take a step back, our learnings are really twofold. We're learning about how to work on this topic internally, but also how to engage with it externally as well with the right partners and the right conversations. And maybe this is a broader learning, but about 3 years ago, we transitioned our sustainability team into the procurement function. So what that allowed us to do within the company was to really accelerate our efforts and integrate these sustainable efforts to be more part of the business. And, I think it's fair to say that our logistics managers and directors within procurement and operations teams are the real ones driving the agenda more so than my team, because they're best suited to help with, design questions, ensure cost efficiency, ensure that we're limiting trade-offs to the extent possible. It also means that we're empowering our teams locally so that they can engage with those local partners. And as you mentioned, right now, we're testing across all of our 6 operating zones, and that means that we're partnering with a variety of partners. So whether that's the startup likes like Nikola, Tesla, versus some of the larger players like BYD, what we're finding is that, we still have significant technological and commercial challenges to ensure that widespread adoption. And for a company our size, again, as you're looking to transition this across 50 markets, it really becomes very difficult. So, where we're testing and validating solutions everywhere possible. I think maybe one of the interesting pieces of information that maybe I'd like to share here is how, although we're piloting local solutions, we're also realizing how, a global footprint of a partner or the variety of solutions offered could also make a difference. For example, BYD is one of our partners. They offer different types of vehicles for us. So we're partnering with them on long distance, large haul tier 1 trucks in China, for example, versus short distance, small haul trucks in the US. And we're learning from that. And by engaging with one partner on those different solutions, we can ensure that, we're providing the right guidance and feedback as we're looking forward to scaling up these initiatives as well. So I would say those are the 2 big learnings internally and externally.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you hit upon a natural inclination many of us have still and have always had, which is to look for one tool for every job in a lot of ways. Like, we need trucks, and like 1 or 2 kinds will solve everybody's needs. And it's the same thing with charging and a bunch of other fronts. And that most of the learning that's happened over the years is that it takes a variety of tools implemented across the board to actually achieve any real progress. So if I were to pivot a little bit and we'll do a quasi lightning round, if you had to give some advice to any company, any viewer watching this going, I want to figure out how to move my company forward, what would each of you recommend first? Pia.
Oh, it's a very good question. So it's the one, well, first of all, there's no one silver bullet answer. I think every company is quite unique, and then you sit with different needs. So I would say the starting point would be to sit down with the business leaders to understand the situation. Where are you today? And then I would say break up the elephant, because you can't reach the 100% goal right away in all markets at the same time. So I think what we've done with going for the 5 cities and setting intermediate goals and take the learnings, and then I fully agree with what has been said as well, that there's a lot of learnings, be it India or China or the US or Europe, where we can transfer that learning. So starting out, breaking it up, having the business in the lead, and then taking the learnings and constantly evolving. So I guess that was not one answer, but tied into one answer.
That's okay. And it sounds like that part of the need is that you end up having to play almost a convening role as much as anything else, of just getting the right voices in the room and talking together. Amitesh, what would be your advice?
So yeah, I think my advice will be make it sensible, make it very sensible for the company as well. And what do I mean by that? For us, customers are the most important. Customer satisfaction, the way they perceive you as a brand, is one of the most important things which you have. Especially in e-commerce, it becomes extremely important. We have seen that with our adoption of green initiatives across the board, it could be any of them, we have seen a significant positiveness essentially that comes for us as well. The other part of that is what we do well is make sure that this becomes a part of the plan for each of the businesses as well. It should not be an initiative. It should be a part of the plan. It should be something that people should be putting on their annual operating plan, and only then it works. That is the level of commitment that is required from the leaders, but that works. It has worked for us. So I'm assuming it will work for others as well.
Yeah, I think it's a big misconception that companies will only get involved when it pencils to every last penny, and that there's no sustainability or progressiveness or leadership or other sort of sentimental value to a company. And it sounds like that's very much not the case from your perspective, that customer perception and company perception ends up weighing as much as dollars and cents, even as those are also still important. Lonnie.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. So first, don't try to do everything. For our sustainability team, there's any number of places that we could have been focusing our effort. And if we had unlimited resources and whatever we wanted to do, we could try to do all of the things in the sustainability space. What we really needed to do, though, were outline all the different places that we could act, really deeply prioritize, and sort of see where can we have the largest impact. Where can what we're doing here really make a fundamental difference? An example for us is, we're talking about things like, LEED certification for our building infrastructure. It's very important. Of course it is. We're also thinking, though, about if we're a company with cars on the road, what is the most important thing for us to do is to decarbonize that part of our business. So while we're still in our sustainability team has only been around for 2 years, what do we need to focus on first? Let's focus on the place where we have the largest impact. So sort of think about the broad scope of what's out there, and then figure out where you're going to really be able to have the most impact at the outset. The next thing that I would say that I think is really important is harnessing all the different voices that care about this issue. For us, that is recognizing how much riders care about where they are putting their money. Investors care. We just released our first ESG report this year, but employees care too. The Lyft employee base cares deeply about this. It matters a lot that we are doing things to sort of act responsibly for our environment as a whole. And so I think those are kind of places that have been really impactful for us.
Ezgi.
Yeah, I agree with everything said, and we also learned that technology is actually advancing at a faster pace than initially expected. I think this is what Pia was mentioning earlier on as well. And what's limiting us is the ecosystem and how slow it is to emerge. And we're seeing the development of more holistic policy portfolios, other partners, more active partners coming into play, and that's where progress is happening fast. So I think my advice would be approaching this as a transformational effort as opposed to a transactional exercise, right? So this is not about sourcing more electric fleets, but actually ensuring that a market exists for it, and getting together a cross-functional team to set those clear goals, set that long-term vision together with the local stakeholders, I think is really critical. So that we can engage in policy as well as technology development and commercial rollout as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, and perfect segue into a last question, and I will reverse it, so I'll come straight back to you. I'm giving you all a magic wand. You've all spent some time now getting into this and figuring out some of the early learnings and a few of the early skin knees and a few of the early successes and all those things. You have a better view of what is needed to move forward now, after sort of the EV 101 is done, versus some others that are new in the cycle. What would single-handedly help you the most, or from your perspective would move this forward the most, if you had the opportunity to wave that wand?
This is a tough question, and I'm gonna give a very very expected answer, I guess. But I would say, it's the policy landscape. I mean, I think it's evolving and it's very encouraging to see around the world. However, what we tend to see is policy actions tend to depend on the status of the electric vehicle market or the technological development, right? But at the same time, that EV market is expecting the policy so that they can evolve, because they cannot evolve without certain enablers or prerequisites. So having that, as I mentioned, cross-functional team that's going to work on shaping the goals and that long-term vision together with local stakeholders, and that means governments, I think is really critical so that it can help serve as a guiding principle. So adaptive diversified policy portfolios that enable and empower us on the demand side, but also the suppliers on the supply side as well, I think is key.
Sure. Well, and certainly I expect policy is going to be a key thing for everybody. So I would also ask, to the extent you are willing to get specific or have a point of view, the types of policy that would be the most helpful. Certainly we have a variety of things, from sort of like the California EV mandate that says you will put electric vehicles on the road if you want to continue to sell vehicles here at all, versus larger CAFE miles per gallon or CO2 standards, versus municipal congestion charges or other schemes. So if you have a point of view on what specific policy would be most helpful to you or to the broader movement, that would be good to know as well. Lonnie.
Well, I'm not sure if this is totally responsive to your question, so let me know. But I think that like the single largest barrier that is holding back wider scale adoption right now is pretty simply the cost for vehicles. If we can bring down the cost of electric vehicles, that in and of itself is going to drive much more quickly the drivers' desire, ability, and actions to be bringing the electric vehicles onto the platform. That's just one piece of things, of course, right? Like we also need to be thinking about charging infrastructure and making sure that that's cost effective as well. But from where we sit on our platform, once the vehicle costs come down, we anticipate that alone is going to be driving a lot of changing behavior on the platform. As to specific policies, we are working with policymakers, from our regulators to just state legislatures and municipalities as well, all the time. We support zero emission vehicle mandates, fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas standards, tax rebates, tax incentives. Those are the things that, we've spent a lot of our time thinking about and making sure that we're trying to help provide thoughtful input there as well.
That was incredibly responsive to my question.
Great.
Amitesh.
Yeah, I'll kind of go to something which is again expected, but it is very relevant for us, which is the infrastructure for essentially charging. A lot of the weights that our small vehicles that essentially take requires a certain distance that the current is either battery technology or charging station do not allow it to happen. And I think that is for us the biggest impediment right now for the growth that we want. And that infrastructure, obviously, if you go down any other smaller cities, it becomes even more a problem area. On the policy front, we are actually working very closely with a lot of policymakers to ensure that we have different kind of vehicles in EVs as well. We have vehicles that carry groceries that requires a lot more, for example, tonnage. We have vehicles that carry very small items, but the weight that they carry is very low. So we have designed different kind of vehicles. And I think one of the things that we are trying to get with the policymakers is to ensure that we have a more seamless approvals for those as well. Because again, EVs in India is something which is very new. People do not understand that as well. And we also want to make sure it is absolutely safe for people who are actually using it. So we want to work with the government to make sure it happens in the way that we want. It should not be that that there are technologies which are not being proven that essentially come in. We want to make sure that the partnership with the government is at the level that allows both the consumers as ourselves to make the right step forward.
Absolutely. And to you, to bat cleanup, Pia.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding to what everyone is saying. So I think it is about policy. It is about getting the costs down to make it easier. And I fully agree the infrastructure needs to be there. So I could pick and choose any of them, but then I'll add one. And that's more in terms of mindset and having a clear common view. And that's within a country or if it's within a city. Because I think it is still a lot around change management. And I mean, we're in and we have decided as companies, all of us here, a lot of companies are still wondering, is it is this going to be, is electrification the right thing to do? And the more we can pan out all these kind of worries and concerns and just come together and have a clear direction, this is the right thing to do. And then, yes, we will need to sort out having a common level playing field on the policy. You need the cost and technology improvements and infrastructure. But I still think there's a lot in terms of change management and hesitancy. Am I going to put my bet on this? Because what is, maybe there's something else that will come that is better. So I think continuing the work of just sharing the successes, but also painting the picture that this is the way to go. And yes, it's not perfect. I mean, an electric car also has an environmental footprint. I mean, it's not like it's a silver bullet. But to be honest and open about it and painting this is where we need to go as a society. And then I think we could take away a lot of all these other business case, policy, infrastructure stuff.
I think that's perfect. And collectively, you've summed up a huge amount of wisdom. So thank you all for joining us. You brought up a number of really good points about the importance of breaking up the elephant, of making things into manageable pieces, about focusing your efforts, picking the things that both your company is best at doing and where you can make the most effort, but also what's right for your organization. But most of all, the importance to get going and the importance of collaboration and policy leadership, which is a perfect segue into our next panel all about policy leadership. I'd like to welcome Helen Clarkson, CEO of the Climate Group since joining the organization in 2017, and a long history before that of corporate and sustainability leadership.
Welcome Minister McLean, UK Minister for Transport, Decarbonisation, and Andy Wales, Chief Digital Impact and Sustainability Officer, BT Group. Let's start by you telling us a bit about your net zero strategy and the role of transport within that. Minister.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. The UK has led the world, as you know, in delivering clean growth. The statistics are really striking, actually. Between 1990 and 2018, our economy has grown by 75%. While emissions have decreased by 43%. That's faster than any other G7 nation. Since 2000, we've decarbonised our economy faster than any other G20 country. And the UK became the first country in 2019 to actually legislate for a net zero target of 2050. But we know we need to go much further, particularly in transport. And that's why we've kicked off a very bold and ambitious transport decarbonisation plan to ensure that we deliver our contribution from transport. This is the biggest piece of work we've ever done. And what we're doing is tackling greenhouse gas emissions across all the modes of transport. We're taking a holistic approach, and we're going to set out a credible and ambitious pathway to delivering our contribution to the carbon budgets and to meet our net zero commitment. We published this document, Decarbonising Transport, Setting the Challenge, at the end of March, setting out how we were going to kick off the work on this plan. And we've been taking part in a huge amount of extensive engagement over the last few months to help develop the plan, taking on board the views of academia, industry, the public, and a host of other groups on how we're going to decarbonise our transport sector. We've been making progress in parallel, of course, as well as that. In May, we announced £2 billion worth of funding for cycling and walking. That's the biggest ever investment in this area. And technical measures, such as the need for rapid renewal of the road vehicle fleet with zero-emission vehicles, are well understood and will deliver substantial reductions in emissions over the long term. But we need to consider very carefully how we travel and how our goods and services reach us today.
Thank you. And of course, transport's such a significant part of UK greenhouse gas emissions. It's great to hear about that. Andy, tell us a bit about BT's strategy on this.
Well, first let me say how important it is for major British businesses like BT that the UK government and the UK overall has taken such a strong position on climate for decades, of course, but in particular, the net zero commitment that was made for 2050. BT has a net zero target we announced about 2 years ago now for 2045. And we've also then extended that commitment to our suppliers, which is about 2/3 of our total footprint emissions, asking them to set the same commitment or faster. And BT is now, has made quite significant steps. We're 100% renewable power in the UK, and we buy about 1% of UK power. And so now our biggest challenge, as you say, is transport. The same as the UK's biggest challenge is now transport. And so we think it's, quite a big challenge for the UK and for BT. And that's in particular because we've got one of the UK's largest commercial fleets, about 30,000 vehicles, mainly diesel, and they tend to sleep outside our engineers' homes. Vehicles all over the UK, outside people's houses, some in terraces, some in detached houses, some in flats. And so the challenge of getting the infrastructure and the capability to get that, to get those vehicles charged as we switch to electric vans is BT's challenge as much as it is the UK's challenge. And so we're delighted to engage with the UK government, to engage with the minister, to understand how we can work together to implement what is known technology, but not that easy necessarily to implement in a widespread way fast across the UK.
Great. And of course, Climate Group, we run the EV 100 campaign. We have 88 businesses committed to electric vehicles, 100% electric vehicles, and BT, thinking about how to make that switch, as you talked about. Do you think we're making the switch fast enough, though, to electric vehicles? And what do both governments and businesses need to do to enable that transition to happen more quickly? Andy, why don't you start on that?
So I think lots of the technologies are available, of course, now to make the switch to EVs. The big challenge is how we make it happen fast enough, how we implement it. BT has transport as our big next challenge after having 100% renewable power. It's the UK's the UK's challenge as well. And there are multiple parts to it. Even though the technology may be there, the kind of solutions are a little bit complex. And part of that is because of things like planning and planning law, which is different at different levels in the UK, at the national government level, at the county level, at the local authority level. And we need to be able to streamline, which this government has been good at in general, streamline planning to make sure that we can get the electric charging points where we need them as fast as we can. And they need to be in an interoperable public system. It needs to be open. It needs to be, for people to be able to innovate on it. It needs to move quite fast. And BT, one of our big challenges, of course, is because our vehicles are all over the UK, outside our employees' homes at night. So our challenge is kind of the UK's charging challenge. And that's where it's important that we move fast. And so BT has worked with the Climate Group to establish the UK Fleet Coalition, which is focused on asking government, all of us together, to work to make this happen fast, to enable by 2030 there to be no new fossil fuel powered or hybrid vehicles sold in the UK, but rather for cars and for small and mid-sized vans, and to be all electrified. And that will, that's quite a challenge. At the moment, we expect cars to be price parity by about 2023, and they are, supported well by grants from government, and we welcome those. The challenge, though, is for the mid-sized vans, kind of 3.5 tons, the typical vehicle that we would have driving around cities all over the UK. And causing, of course, when we combine that with all the other companies that have those vehicles, some of the air pollution challenges we all know. The challenge is to get that to price parity. And at the moment, it can be up to twice as much, even including the government grants. And the risk of that is then that we, of course, companies will, back end investments towards the end of the decade when we think price parity will come, rather than being able to invest much sooner because they're so much more expensive. And there's even an availability challenge. Mid-sized vans are only really available in the UK in electric form this year. And there's more vehicles, of course, left-hand drive for much of Europe than there is in the UK with the right-hand drive system. And so we need to work together in a creative way with government and others to make sure those vehicles become available and to make sure that the economics of those vehicles work as soon as we can. And that's why we're delighted that companies like Tesco have joined the coalition recently, of course, alongside BT that's been there from the start, companies like Unilever as well, who are in there, and others joining as well. And we welcome that energy and that call on government to really accelerate the investments we need in electrification in transport.
Great, thank you. And yes, we're really pleased to be working with you on the Electric Fleets Coalition. Minister, how about that question about how governments and business can work on this together?
Well, can I welcome very much, Andy, the commitment that you're showing as a leading UK business in this. I think it is really important that businesses and government work hand in hand, because we do need to show leadership and we do need to show ambition. And I think it's incredibly important that you've taken the steps that you have done. But you are right. We recognise we do need to go further and faster if we are going to hit those carbon budgets, which are incredibly challenging. We all know that. I think the key piece of work that we're doing on this objective is our 2030X consultation, where we are looking at possibly accelerating the phase out of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans, and also looking at the role that hybrids will play in that. We have had that consultation over the summer. We've received an avalanche of responses, and we are now considering that very carefully and thinking through the implications of date that the government will announce. Because we know we have to be ambitious, but as part of that, it isn't only the date. We do need to make sure that we have the surrounding infrastructure. And you've highlighted a key point around planning. So there's more to do in that space. And I work very closely with other colleagues in other government departments to address some of those sort of challenging barriers that exist. We're doing a massive amount in terms of what will happen in new built environment infrastructure. But it does become more challenging when you're talking about retrofitting what's already there. But we are supporting and investing up to some £2.5 billion across the piece in terms of helping local councils, businesses, workplaces actually install the charging infrastructure that's needed. You also talk about making sure we have the right amount of supply of electric vehicles, and that's equally important. So we are also investing in supporting the car industry to make the switch and to accelerate the transition. They're all committed to this goal, but we recognise that there will be support that's needed to help them make that transition, which is a seismic transition.
Thank you. And of course, we're talking in 2020, there's one very big thing on everyone's mind, which is COVID-19. And it's been hugely disruptive to the global economy. But of course, it's also changed our work and travel patterns. We're doing this virtually. We're not in person together in New York, just as one example. It's really raising awareness, though, I think, with the public and with others about clean air, about sustainable transport. The other big thing that's happening, of course, in the climate world and for the UK is next year the UK is hosting COP26. How does all this come together, and how do we maintain the momentum around these topics into COP26? Minister.
Yes, you've raised a very important point, and obviously it was right to hold COP26 next year. We are incredibly ambitious as a government around all these targets, and we do see this as a fantastic opportunity for us to be leaders in this field, as we already are, but to go further. And I think COVID as well has highlighted the imperative for us to build back better and build back greener. So all the work that we're doing in my department and across government is very much focused on that green print for a green recovery and a green restart of transport, and all the policies that we are introducing play into that holistically. So we've announced obviously £5 billion for cycling and walking across the piece as well. Some of that will be able to be spent on buses, decarbonising buses, and as well as that, we are focusing very much on our commitments under the Paris Agreement and those sustainable development goals. It's not only my department, but it's other departments of government as well that are working through this.
Thank you. Andy.
Well, I think COVID-19 has given us lots of challenges. And of course, we have all experienced the quite dramatic change in workplace for many of us, whether we are living at work or working at home. There's a lot of things we have discovered that actually things that we might have thought would take 5 or 10 years to happen in terms of, widespread home working, in terms of widespread use of the NHS online, GP appointments online, a whole range of changes in our lives that we thought, might be changes that might take years, have happened quite rapidly. And we found that, for example, BT, obviously, as the main broadband provider in the UK, found that the network can cope with it. In fact, the network's quite resilient. And we're investing a lot to build the network even further in the next few years. So I think what we've learned from that is that you can do things faster than you might have expected, even complex things, if the urgency is there and if people can work together. And I think that's an opportunity, of course, for electric vehicles in the UK, and it's an opportunity on transport more broadly as we come to COP26. I think there are big challenges in the short term around planning. We've talked about other pieces, and longer term about big questions about opportunities of technologies like hydrogen, which is always the technology that's about to work in the future, right? And so but it's probably quite critical for kind of large lorries and large transport options. And so, so I think there are some quite big questions we need to work on in a much more committed, fast-moving way together. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that we can, when we really want to, and we really feel there's an imperative, work together. And we're seeing all over the world in the last few weeks, from wildfires on the west coast of the US to temperatures elsewhere, that actually that imperative is there, and we must help the group of us, companies, politicians, NGOs, and others, really keep that imperative, I think, in the kind of public consciousness as we move forward to COP26.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks to both of you for the leadership you're showing on this. And it's great to see all the work that's going in and the momentum that I think we are building, working together as we go towards COP26. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers and our sponsors and our delegates and everybody who came out to nerd out about EVs, as I always love to do. Please check out climategroup.org, look at joining EV100, becoming a fellow pioneer with us, and join the corporate campaigns booth in the exhibition hall a little bit later. There are folks to hang out with and chat more about the Climate Group and all the fantastic work that they're doing. Most of all, go back and be happy warriors wherever you're at, and we look forward to seeing you next year.